His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, Honorable Ministers and members of the diplomatic community, private sector representatives, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Faith Mangope, television and radio broadcaster, the founder of the Faith Mangope Technology and Leadership Institute for Girls, and a woman in this country who knows all too well the impact of gender-based violence on the family and home, community and country. You see, like many women in this country, I too come from an environment where violence was an all too normal phenomenon. The significant part of my childhood marred with memories of physical and emotional abuse in where was supposed to be my safest sanctuary, my home. It is indeed from this understanding of the indelible impact of gender-based violence on the human spirit that I took the decision to open an education institute which provides young women with the skills and competencies to thrive in the digital economy. You see, it's not enough to provide the antidote for gender-based violence. We need to be champions of preventative interventions, like education. For education provides access. Access provides autonomy. And in many cases, that autonomy becomes the lifeline of escaping abuse or violence. We are past the diagnosis stage of gender-based violence. The time to act is way past its due date, which is why an intervention such as this, where private sector raises their hands to be counted in the doing and not just the complaining, is that gasp of air in an otherwise drowning society. This launch will provide an opportunity for a range of private sector companies to make financial pledges towards the fund and the implementation of the NSP. And we thank the Presidency for spearheading the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund 1. This was a vision, ladies and gentlemen, that was articulated in the declaration of GBVF emanating from the Presidential Summit in November 2018, which called for a GBVF fund, a vision that our President, His Excellency, President Ramaphosa, had at the start of 2020 to organize an event with the private sector to build relationships and mobilize funds towards the implementation of the National Strategic Plan. We also equally thank the International Women's Forum for their collaborative role in this initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, today marks the beginning of true change. And with that, let's turn our attention to a video which illustrates the importance of funding gender-based violence programs.
Violence against women has become more than a national crisis. It is a crime against our common humanity.
Gender-based violence continues to be a national crisis, exacerbated by COVID-19, and has been referred to as the second pandemic. Gender-based violence is by no means a new phenomenon in South Africa. It is an ongoing battle that has seen national marches and cities-wide shutdowns to bring this scourge to the attention of the government. Government and civil society have made available resources to help survivors through the ordeal, to help them get justice and to help them on their road to healing and recovery, including the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide that was published in 2020. The NSP is centered around 6 pillars. Meet Nontle. She is from a rural area in the Eastern Cape and has been looking for work for months. Finally, she is promised work, but when she arrives at the office she was told to go to, she is instead locked in, is beaten and raped. But Nontle does not want to be just another statistic, like the 2 friends she knows who have also been raped, and she is determined to report the matter. They inform her that the police station has no rape kits or DNA lab.
We need to train all centers to be ready for GBV. The same thing that we did for COVID and how quickly we did it, how we resourced, how we went into a lockdown, how we had hotspots on news, so how we had toll-free numbers is what we need to do for GBV in this country. And we need to set aside budget at national, provincial, and community level for these kinds of interventions. The justice system is failing us, and we do need more resources. But if we have accountability and a justice system that works, that a person gets locked up, should there be sufficient evidence, proper investigations that are followed all the way through right till the end. We need an integrated data system. Can you imagine how much money we are saving the court system by preventing rather than crisis management?
It is our collective responsibility to end gender-based violence.
Well, as we begin to just take in and introspect on women such as Nontle, who are not new to the South African context where stories of gender-based violence are often articulated, it is just so moving to see that even with the problem that she's identified, even with her reality, she's able to even come up with a solution of how we can be practical in our interventions. And really that is the role of this afternoon, isn't it? And with that, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to call upon my first speaker of the afternoon, and that is also hearing from business associations as they pledge their support towards the GBVF 1. And of course, with that, I'd like to call upon the CEO of Business Unity South Africa, Cass Gavadia. Cass, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity. Honorable President, ministers present, business leaders and colleagues and others, thank you very much for this opportunity on behalf of Business Unity South Africa. Gender-based violence is a sad, a tragic but critical issue for this country. We should all hang our heads in shame that we are having to launch a fund for gender-based violence and to combat gender-based violence. But it is with us, it's a critical issue, and we need to deal with it. I think we need to look at gender-based violence within the context of other gender-based injustices in our country and around the world, including issues of equity for women, opportunities for women, and patriarchy that still persists, not just in South Africa, but in the globe. BUSA is committed to promoting this initiative with our members. We are committed to working with the President, with government, with other stakeholders to ensure that after this launch, we have various methods of communication with our members where our members can be addressed by some of the founders of this fund, that we work with our members to raise funding for the work on gender-based violence. We all appreciate that we are living in difficult times. The COVID pandemic has had a significant impact on our economy, but this is an issue that we need to ensure that we promote, and BUSA is committed to working to actually promote that with our members. We would also ensure that our members introduce measures to identify and deal with gender-based violence in the workplace. We cannot tolerate situations of gender-based violence in the workplace. We need to identify it, we need to deal with it, and ultimately we need to eradicate it in the workplace. But let me just say that while we will support this initiative, while we will work with government and others to promote the initiative, I think we do need to recognize that this is a broader societal issue. It's not just money, it's not just 16 days of activism, it's not just publicity around gender-based violence, but we all have to come together as a society to dig a bit deeper into our souls. We believe that South African society has, for some reason or other, become a violent one. In our discourse, in our interactions, in our relationships with one another. There seems to be something wrong with our psyche, and we need to actually dig deep down to understand what is wrong with our psyche. We need to reinstall family values that we seem to have lost. the values and behaviors we inculcate in young boys. We need to look at that and we need to question ourselves about that. And we need to take personal responsibility for the scourge on our country. And we need to personally, every day of our lives, work to eradicate it. So in conclusion, we need to work together to show intolerance towards this, to address gender-based violence, not just during 16 days of activism, but every day through our own living examples as individuals and as groups of people. And with that, we will be absolutely clear. We pledge our support for the fund. We will encourage our members to participate in the fund, and we will work with the organizers and with the governing body to ensure that we promote the fund with all our members, and also encourage our members to conduct their business in a way that reduces and eradicates gender-based violence in the workplace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those moving words, Cass Kuvadia there, the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. You know, Cass was very authentic in his remarks when he said it's actually quite disheartening to know that we actually have to launch a fund to tackle the scourge of gender-based violence in this country, that it should never have to come to that. But it is through interventions as this one that we're able to see practical change actually happen. As we did say in the beginning, really is, the beginning starts today. And we're going to win against the fight of gender-based violence. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce another individual for supporting business as well as its initiatives, and that is the president of the Black Business Council, Sandile Zungu. Sandile, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It is over to you.
Your Excellency, President Ramaphosa, honorable ministers in attendance today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Sandile Zungu, president of the Black Business Council, and incidentally, I'm also the proud owner and president of the oldest professional soccer team in South Africa, AmaZulu Football Club. So let me salute you properly, all of you. Hebe Usut. The oppression of women is a serious affront to our shared and common humanity and destiny. It cannot be that more than 50% of our population is born into and raised in an environment that does not fully appreciate them. Gender-based violence, GBV, is a tool that men cowardly use to subjugate women. It is wrong, it is evil. Yet, gender-based violence is not just a matter for human rights. It is also a major impediment to economic development. The giant economy that South Africa is will never punch at its weight when its muscles are restrained by the scourge of gender-based violence. Fighting gender-based violence is a business imperative. It must be done. Hence, we in the Black Business Council support this noble effort. We support the private sector effort at creating a fund to champion the cause of women, the GBVF Response Fund. We urge South African corporates, including the soccer fraternity, of which AmaZulu Football Club belong, to support the GBVF Response Fund 1 with generous contributions, both financially and in kind. It is the right thing to do. We wish the organizers of this noble effort and the custodians thereof well. I thank you.
Masibonge Babzungu. Thank you so much. And for those words, that indeed gender-based violence is an actual impediment to economic development, how we're supposed to thrive and have inclusive economic development when we're still battling the scourge of gender-based violence as well as patriarchy. And these are just some of the themes and the touch points that we'll be embarking on and interrogating throughout the course of the afternoon as we establish just that footing and as well as that foundation from where this fund will see itself thrive. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call upon one of our speakers who is actually joining us this afternoon in studio, and that is Usisibongile Ndashe, who is the Executive Director of ISLA, which is the Initiative for Strategic Litigation in Africa. Sisibongile, the platform is all yours.
Thank you. His Excellency President Ramaphosa, business leaders, all ministers in attendance, and everyone, good afternoon. It's an exciting moment to see the culmination of various efforts taking us to this day. The movement of the total shutdown, the 24 demands, the GBVF summit, and the sentence shutdown urging corporate South Africa to fund the fight helped to propel the conversation and make the issues urgent. This work stands on the shoulders of contributions made by various civil society formations who spent decades working on various versions of the National Strategic Plan. Imagine what it will take to end gender-based violence and femicide, and those who continue to provide services to victims and survivors of gender-based violence and femicide. The struggle to understand the core components of a truly meaningful response has often stood in the way of funding this work. Committing to developing a shared understanding of the NSP and working together despite whatever differences we may have is our way out of this scourge. We don't have outcomes that can be packaged neatly and sold to the private sector. There are no 2,000 graduations to be held or art exhibitions. There is no new tap with running water. Investing in ending GBVF is about enabling us to live lives that are free from violence. Fundraisers have often come back with the response that the private sector says they are unable to see or measure the impact of interventions on gender-based violence and femicide. The 6 pillars of the National Strategic Plan offers a comprehensive framework to understand the ecosystem of what it will take to end the scourge. Each pillar is organized to look at the purpose, approach, and strategic areas of intervention. And for impact measurement, we have Chapter 7, which provides a framework for monitoring your investments on each of the 6 pillars. You will know what success looks like. Most of these interventions are not new, but what we are asking for is the ability to scale up the work, and that's what this fund will enable us to do. It is common knowledge that there are some who will prefer to set up their own GBVF programs and use their bulk of their CSI budgets to implement the NSP in-house. You are not the only ones who are concerned about the trust deficit, but Pillar 1 is foregrounded on accountability, coordination, and leadership of the NSP, ensuring that there are sound institutional and operational arrangements to ensure credible leadership, address fragmentation in the response, and ensuring that those who do not do right by us are held accountable. Ensuring that there's a civil society that can maintain oversight, demand transparency, and seek recourse when things have not gone according to plan are some of the activities that should be funded. When we talk about prevention, we're talking about changing behavior, eliminating gender harmful stereotypes, and male supremacy, and that's an urgent task that we all need to attend to. Work that is aimed at prevention of violence and rebuilding social cohesion, that's work under Pillar 2, which focuses on prevention and rebuilding social cohesion by eliminating social acceptance of GBVF. And this is work that's targeted at individuals, families, communities, children, and some of them in schools. The duty to protect. We know that there is an ineffective criminal justice system that has suffered years of neglect and primarily serves to further re-traumatize victims and survivors of GBVF. The system requires an overhaul. Pillar 3 seeks to address the systemic challenges that have resulted in inadequate response. The ability to seek recourse for people who have been failed by the criminal justice system is another service that must be prioritized if we are to end the culture of impunity. Law reform, accessing an efficient and sensitive criminal justice system, and strengthening the state's capacity to respond is what your money will go to. Pillar 4 tells us that the civil society has tended to carry the bulk of this load, and it's about ensuring that survivors have care and support that enable containment and long-term healing. Strengthening and rolling out one-stop justice shops like the Tutuzela care centers that link vital support services to victims, like counseling, medical support, engaging the police and prosecutors in a safe environment. These are some of the things that you will be contributing towards. Shelter, court support are all the programs that we need under Pillar 4. Pillar 5, it's about economic power. Pillar 5 makes a decisive link between the lack of economic power and GBVF. Marketing rape insurance or making it easier for us to get business loans with oppressive terms that will make us even more destitute is not the economic power we want you to invest in. Safe workplaces, accelerated initiatives that address women's unequal position through access to government and private sector procurement, safe workplaces, child support and maintenance systems to address women's economic vulnerability is what we would like you to address, to invest in. The final pillar speaks to research and information systems. We may want to believe we know what violence looks like, but an improved understanding of the extent of GBVF, investment in research to ensure that programming is based on evidence-based research is key. Thank you. So please fund the fight, and as Total Shutdown told us, don't let our bodies continue to be a crime scene. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sibongile. And you're absolutely right. When you understand the full context of gender-based violence and femicide, you fully understand exactly what interventions need to be put in place. You also fully understand the realities that people are confronted with on a daily basis. It's not just talk, you see, it's also about action and also being able to understand and contextualize just how rife GBVF is in the South African context. And we thank you very much for giving us insight, just a little bit of insight in terms of the realities that are currently faced. So thank you very much for those words, Sibongile. I'd like to now call upon Dr. Nados Bekele-Thomas, who's a resident coordinator from the United Nations in South Africa, just to speak a little bit about the reason for global partnerships and the reason why we have organizations such as the United Nations that are fully behind an initiative such as this one. Dr. Nados, are you with us?
Yes. Thank you, Program Director. Good afternoon to Your Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, my two sisters, Minister for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, and the Minister for Department of Social Development, the members of the Diplomatic Corps, the International Women Forum for South Africa, and representatives of the private sector, our esteemed international guests. Allow me to stand on the shoulders of the preceding speakers and say all protocols observed. Thank you, Mr. President, for your exemplary leadership in the fight against gender-based violence and femicide. When we were together at the 2018 Gender-Based Violence Summit, dozens of women stood up and through their painful and haunting testimonies exclaimed emphatically, "Enough is enough." Since then, under your leadership, your country has established a comprehensive, holistic, and ambitious national strategic plan. And implementation of this plan has begun in earnest. However, we still face enormous implementation challenges, in particular, consistency in prevention and response services mired in negative gender social norms and the lack of reliable and comprehensive data. Although on the latter, I'm happy that South Africa is embarking on its first ever dedicated GBV National Prevalence Survey. and I am proud of the United Nations participation in this endeavor. However, I admit that the most critical and urgent challenge is the subject of today's event, which is financing the NSP. As we all know, the UN Secretary General has made gender-based violence one of his priority areas for global intervention. To this end, the Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women was established by the UN General Assembly Resolution 5166. We also await the confirmation of the Secretary General's COVID-19 Fund. In addition, a global fund worth mentioning is the 500 million euro Spotlight Initiative that the European Union and the United Nations have established, targeting large-scale investments. We're hopeful that some of these resources will be redirected to South Africa. Your Excellency, the Generation Equality Platform, which you champion, is also our greatest opportunity to mobilize multi-stakeholders and fast-track actions to end GBVF and ensure economic justice for all women and girls. We join you in pleading for the support of all partners and donors, especially philanthropic trusts, foundations, and the business community operating in South Africa and abroad. It is in all our interests to be actively engaged in creating the future society we want, free of fear and violence. Through the UN, the private sector, I should say, already has strong partnerships to build from. 85 companies in South Africa are signatories of the Women Empowerment Principles of the UN Global Compact. The De Beers Group have invested $6 million towards women businesses in the informal sector, while the Standard Bank Group has invested $3 million to women farmers in our region. And Your Excellency, the UN, together with the Department of Women, the Presidency, and business, are currently exploring the idea of establishing a gender bond to finance women empowerment programs. Your Excellency, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, as the representative of the UN Secretary General in South Africa, I commit the support of the entire United Nations system toward the implementation of the National Strategic Plan. We understand that this is not the business of a single agency, but the business of the entire UN system, simply because we understand the multi-sectoral nature of the problem. As quoted in the earlier video, if you have seen it, the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. The inaction and silence on violence against women and children and the impunity with which this happens should be broken forever. Break the silence with your support, with your investment, and with your voice. I leave you with a personal mantra. Inaction and silence begets violence. And we should all say, not in my name. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nados Bekele Thomas there. And indeed, you're absolutely correct. Evil does triumph when good people choose to do nothing. And we thank you for the commitment that has been demonstrated by the United Nations in collectively helping us to fight the scourge. And on to this one, we also know that when it comes to gender-based violence and as well as the fight against the femicide, it's not, number one, a one-day event. It's, number two, not even one that can be done in a silo. We need collective contribution. We need the entire community working with us. We need the global community, private partnerships, as well as those individuals that will be brave enough to make the decision to come in the front line and fight the scourge. Ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon we have the absolute honor and privilege of being able to share with you a message coming in from one such a global partner who decided to raise his hand up, saying, yes, I want to be counted. I want to be counted, ensuring that indeed this initiative is funded. Where would we be without such global partnerships? And ladies and gentlemen, with that, it is my absolute honor and my privilege to introduce to you a message coming in from one of our global partners, highly acclaimed actor as well as philanthropist, and that is Forrest Whitaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to accept President Ramaphosa's invitation to take part in your gathering to support South Africa's National Strategic Plan on gender-based violence and femicide. Your initiative is timely in these times of trial. South Africa is the country that COVID-19 has hit the hardest in Africa. But health is just one of the recent areas of impact. The coronavirus pandemic has combined with another, gender-based violence, which is an epidemic that hit women and girls disproportionately. Today, you are taking key steps to better understand and address the extent of the problem. With my foundation, the Whitaker Peace and Development Initiative, WPDI, we are proud to join you in this campaign through our programs on the ground. Since 2019, WPDI has been deploying a youth empowerment program in Cape Town, a city that I know well and to which I've grown attached. Last summer, with our partners BNP Paribas and RCS, we conducted a survey on violence and insecurity in Cape Town to adapt our program in the flats to local realities. One such reality is clear. Women are much more exposed to violence than men. Gender-based violence is clearly both a source and a symptom of the inequalities we find among women and men. Even before reaching violence, these inequalities affect everyone. We learn that in the neighborhoods of Cape Town, violence, or even the fear of violence, gets people to skip work or school. This undermines economic development both for today and for tomorrow. At WPDI, we contribute to empowering women and combat gender-based violence in South Africa by building on strategies of inclusion. My main program, the Youth Peacemaker Network, enrolls young people from fragile neighborhoods of the flats and trains them as mediators, entrepreneurs, social activists, or teachers. We've taken extra care to have young women well represented among the first cohort of young leaders we established in Cape Town. This ensures that they can work at changing things in their neighborhoods. Empowering young women as local leaders is a key investment in addressing gender-based violence. Recently, community leaders and officials requested our youth to run community dialogues on gender-based violence in the aftermath of the spring lockdown. Our youth made a point to invite women to share their experiences. Highlighting women's voices is vital to making change happen. We have seen in the U.S. with the Me Too movement, but it is not just the voices of women that matter. We've also included men in the conversation. Too often, the epidemic of gender-based violence spreads because of the silence that surrounds it, and because too many men are left out of the discussion. But men must be included in this conversation. Our meeting today suggests that things are moving in the right direction. I want to commend President Ramaphosa again for taking the initiative to lead the society of South Africa on the path of transformative change. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for this time.
Thank you very much for those words. They're coming in from acclaimed actor as well as philanthropist Forrest Whitaker. And you can hear just the work that has been done in Cape Town to ensure that indeed the scourge of violence is tackled and tackled quite efficiently as well. So we do thank you for your contribution, and we thank you for your continued support as well. We do understand that without the likes of yourselves, this initiative, this program, and everything else that we're trying to do and accomplish in this country would not be possible. So we do thank you for that partnership. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute honor and my privilege to now call upon Nicolette Naylor, who's the International Program Director for Gender, Racial and Ethnic Justice from the Ford Foundation. Nicolette, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. The platform is all yours.
Good afternoon. I'd like to acknowledge His Excellency President Ramaphosa, and on behalf of the Ford Foundation, we are honored to be part of this bold initiative as we heed the call by President Ramaphosa to end gender-based violence and femicide in this country. The Ford Foundation is a global social justice foundation working to end gender-based violence around the world as part of our global program on gender, racial, and ethnic justice. We are committed to supporting the work of feminist movements, women's movements, and survivors of violence, and keeping them at the center of our work. We are investing in this work at the global level in Southern Africa, West Africa, Latin America, and India. We know that no matter how much dollars we devote to this issue, no single foundation or development partner or multinational company can solve the problem of gender-based violence. If we want to get to scale, we have to come together across multiple sectors and find new ways of working together. So we are excited about the prospect of doing bigger and bolder things together to really make a difference in the lives of women and girls. To do this, we have to get better at partnership. We must resist fragmented approaches to the work where each of us try to develop our own strategies without coordinating around a national vision and plan. In this moment, we have an opportunity like never before to build a platform for partnership and collaboration between multiple stakeholders to make the very progressive National Strategic Plan a reality. The hard work around developing the NSP was the first phase, and as a foundation, we have been committed to this process that we must remember was catalyzed by brave women and girls who took to the streets 2 years ago to demand action by government. We have and will continue to support the critical work of these women's rights organizations. And we also see the importance of supporting government, and specifically a government that has been willing to hear women and girls' calls for action. A government that has been willing to invite women and girls in to co-create a national strategic plan. And this co-creation that brought civil society and government and all of South Africa together to develop a plan has been an innovation for the world to learn from. President Ramaphosa's call to action and his willingness to listen to what women and girls in this country need is not insignificant. Having a president express commitment to address GBV is important. Political leadership matters in this space. In my role at the global level, I've seen how rare it is to get presidential commitment on this issue, and how rare it is to see government committing financial, technical, and political resources and leadership to the issue. The Ford Foundation is also co-leading the Generation Equality Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, led by UN Women, where the world is coming together to develop a concrete action plan for addressing GBV with key governments, civil society, private sector leaders, and philanthropy. And while that process is unfolding globally, we believe that local experiences from the Global South and South African experiences can and should serve as a blueprint for the world, where we take the local to the global and encourage the world to learn from our experience. We are particularly excited about the partnership that the private sector brings to the work on gender-based violence, because we have learned from our experience that when private philanthropy, the private sector, and impact investing community come together with feminists and progressive governments, we can unlock hundreds of millions of dollars for work on gender equality at the global level. We are therefore excited about the potential role that the private sector can play to create more sustainable investment models for work on gender-based violence. Let me conclude by reminding us that the launch of the National Strategic Plan to End Gender-Based Violence and Femicide was the first step. Now we must roll up our sleeves and get down to the hard work of making that progressive plan a reality for survivors of violence in the country. Today is a critical step on our journey as we launch the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund 1. Because we know that a plan without financial resources, political leadership, and multiple stakeholders behind it will never amount to anything. We need to put money alongside our political commitments. I'm pleased, therefore, on behalf of the Ford Foundation, to pledge an amount of 20.2 million rand to support the vision of the National Strategic Plan. This money will be split between the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund and will be used specifically to support partnership between women's rights organizations, philanthropy, the private sector and government, because this kind of partnership provides a crucial blueprint for us, not only as South Africans, but for the region and the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Nicolette. And I love what you said, all in one sentence. You were able to say it is time for us to roll up our sleeves and really do the hard work. And not only did you just roll up your sleeves and do the hard work, immediately went on to pledge 20.2 million rand towards this fund. I think that that in itself is an absolute honorable pledge that you've made, and we appreciate it. Thank you so much. I think on behalf of women in this country even, thank you so much for your contribution as well as your pledge. And yes, indeed, we can certainly give you a round of applause for that. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached a part of the program where we need to make it land. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why is this so significant? Why is it that we're taking this time to not only speak to the problem of gender-based violence and femicide, but actually to do something about it? While to elaborate and really to make it land in terms of the significance of this day, it is my honor and my privilege to call upon now the President of the International Women's Forum, South Africa, Irene Charnley. Irene.
His Excellency President Ramaphosa, honorable ministers, representatives of the private sector, philanthropies, business associations, IWFSA, and the diplomatic corps. Ladies and gentlemen, our gathering here today is taking place during unprecedented times. We are launching the private sector-led Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund at a time when our country is facing two pandemics, the coronavirus pandemic and the gender-based violence and femicide pandemic. The coronavirus pandemic has brought some of our strength as a nation to the fore, but it has also exposed our inequalities and the effects of the persistent economic and social gaps. And it has exposed the pervasive pandemic which preceded it, gender-based violence and femicide. Mr. President, a year ago, the IWFSA had a dialogue with His Excellency and members of the Cabinet where a number of issues were tabled. The IWFSA offered our commitment and support with any assistance that may be required to galvanize support for the different components of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence in order to augment existing government resources. I don't need to recite the statistics on GBVF in South Africa. They are frightening, they are alarming, they are horrifying, and they terrify us. Mr. President, it is a privilege for IWFSA to have heeded the call to play a leading role to establish a private sector-led fund to combat GBVF. Today's launch honors and recognizes women and girls whose lives and voices mattered, but who were silenced by the GBVF pandemic and our inability to put enough resources behind ending it. This is a response to the plight of women and children across all 44 districts in our country who live in fear and die every day due to the GBVF pandemic. IWFSA has assembled critical partners from the most reputable private sector companies who are all contributing their resources on a pro bono basis. I would like to mention and publicly thank them by name. First of all, ENS Africa for the legal agreements, the memorandum of incorporation, registration, tax applications, etc., under the leadership of Professor Michael Katz. Secondly, APSA for incorporating the corporate bank account, balance sheet management, project management capacity, donations disbursement process under the leadership of Mr. Daniel Manelli. Thirdly, Alexander Forbes, who will handle the day-to-day administration of the fund, cash flow management, disbursement to beneficiaries, asset management, modeling that is needed, actuarial services under the leadership of David de Villiers. Fourthly, PwC for the accounting services to ensure the fund's accounts are done properly, advisory and governance services, risk and cybersecurity, led by Madame Shirley Mashaba. And lastly, Deloitte for the auditing services, which are led by CEO Lwazi Bam. Now, we can proudly state today that the GBVF Response Fund is incorporated as a non-profit company and registered with CIPC effective 28 January, with the objectives of the fund clearly articulated in the Memorandum of Incorporation. The fund will have transparent and robust grant-making systems and will definitely, as its first priority, support measures that seek to eradicate GBVF as per the NSP. Secondly, it would provide a channel for the private sector to make wider contributions. It will make resources accessible with priority to grassroots organizations and NGOs. Fourthly, it will strengthen the GBVF intervention programs through partnerships. It will support and fund research and data collections. It will provide technical support for the delivery of programs and many more. It will also ensure accountability and sound governance. So the board of the GBVF Response Fund will be led by Dr. Judy Dlamini as chairman. Dr. Judy is a successful businesswoman. She's Chancellor of Wits University and Chair of the Wits Donald Gordon Medical Center. Dr. Judy is well placed to lead this fund. She will be supported by Deputy Chairman Wendy Lucas-Bull, the highly regarded Chair of APSA and ShopRite Holdings, and then Madame Faith Kanile, who's the CEO of the Women's Development Bank Investment Holdings, as well as Dr. Namani Magau, the Director on numerous boards. The founding board will assemble an eminent and capable board of directors from across all sectors, including civil society and labor, to govern the mandate of the fund. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, women, girls and children who constitute the majority of citizens in South Africa live in fear. It is time for action with measurable results through the GBVF Response Fund. Let us harness the collective resources of the private sector and tackle the GBVF pandemic in South Africa head-on. I would now like to hand over to the chairman of the fund, Dr. Judy Dlamini. Over to Dlamini.
Thank you, Madam Irene. Your Excellency, President Cyril Ramaphosa, Honorable Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disability, Minister Maite Nkwane Mashabane, Cabinet Ministers, IWF colleagues, representatives of the private sector, philanthropies and the diplomatic corps, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, Sanibonani. We are honored and humbled as a board of the fund to be part of this private sector-led GBVF groundbreaking intervention. And we thank the presidency for the leadership. Today marks an important day in the history of ending gender-based violence and femicide in the country, a social menace that ravages our families, our communities, and robs the country of its economic potential. We appreciate the positive response from the private sector, government, and civil society, as the optimal impact of this initiative will be determined by our collective efforts and partnerships. In the light of this, the board is looking forward to leveraging on collaboration with other partners and harnessing the contributions of civil society organizations, knowledge management institutions, and global institutions. These partnerships will ensure that the board executes an effective strategy that is relevant to the needs and opportunities for empowerment of women and girls who are vulnerable to the negative impacts of gender-based violence and harm. It is also our commitment to draw from the intellectual capacity and research from the university to strengthen policy development, implementation, monitoring, and reporting on the elimination of gender-based violence and femicide. This will enable a focused, integrated, multidisciplinary approach that can translate the pain of our women to economic power and meaningful leadership roles in society. In addition, we will ensure that there are public engagements with ordinary South Africans to raise awareness for the work the fund is doing and call for a collective action for prevention of GBVF. The board will establish administrative systems to support due diligence around the grant-making process, which will embed transparency. Community-based organizations will be assisted in their understanding of grant-making processes by electronic systems and support from social facilitators. As we see this as a collective journey for all in society, we will provide regular reports on the focus areas and impact of the programs, in keeping with accountability that we commit to. The pulse of our programmatic focus will be directly linked with the 6 NSP pillars, and in cases where there are no resources in the fund, we will seek partnerships. I'm excited from the contribution that has been announced by Ford Foundation's Nicolette. Thank you so much, Nicolette. Amongst the priorities is to ensure that the work with the police in the attempt to reduce second victimization of women that we are all too familiar with, work with business in job creation initiatives, and the creation of an inclusive, equitable, and safe workspace, which will enable women to break the vicious cycle of abuse. We truly appreciate the support. The president of the IWFSA has thanked some of their business partners that have offered pro bono services. Thank you so much. We appreciate the social conscience and the goodwill that the sector has shown thus far. We commit to nurture the collaborative spirit to achieve a GBVF-free society, as alluded to in August at the multi-party initiative in August that was led by our Minister of Women, who committed to eradication of GBVF in our lifetime. I thank you.
Very much for that, Dr. Judy Dlamini. You know, as you were speaking about how accountability is key when it comes to this form of initiative, so that indeed we're able to ensure that those objectives that we've set out we're able to accomplish. And thank you so much for the transparency within which you've actually engaged when it comes to the GBVF fund one, and also looking at how is it that you'll be strategic and ensure that indeed there's a thin line or a line of sustainability when it comes to this program. Sustainability is key if we're truly to make a large impact. So do thank you for those moving words. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if like some of us here, you're wondering what is happening in the background, while it is raining, and it's so beautiful when it comes to the rain, because it just signifies how blessed this event is and how blessed it is as a country and how blessed we are as a nation to be able to have a fund of this nature. You see, I always believe that you don't have to be spiritual to understand that indeed rain comes with plenty of blessings, and what a significant day to be blessed as a nation indeed. And South Africa, I think that we get to be proud of ourselves this afternoon. So thank you so much for that, and enjoy the blessings as they shower upon us. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, let me welcome the chairman of ENS Africa, Professor Michael Katz, to give an address. Professor Michael, the platform is all yours.
Thank you, Director. His Excellency, President Cyril Ramaphosa, honourable ministers of the Cabinet who are here, esteemed guests, thank you so much for giving me the privilege of being involved in this really, truly inspirational project. When Irene asked me to draw the MOI, I thought that this was a great honor, and I thank the organizers for bestowing this on me. You've heard such inspirational and eloquent addresses up to now, and now it's my function to deal with the less inspiring technical issues that will make this fund work. But I really want to assure you that in drawing the documents and giving advice, it was exciting, it was stimulating, fulfilling. It's not just words here. This is designed to make this very important project work. When Irene spoke to me about drawing the MOI, I said to her I would like to use the MOI of the Solidarity Fund, which I also had the privilege of drafting, as it really had a lot of thought and effort, which I will submit is going to be very relevant to the GBVF fund. Now, for a fund of this nature to be successful and to attract donations, there are a number of fundamental principles that we embodied in the Solidarity Fund MOI and in its operations. And with your permission, I want to just mention some of them. The first is an independent board, a board that is in charge of other people's money and is committed to implement the objects of the fund. The composition of the board must be diverse and must reflect the stakeholders' interest in the organization. And I think that we can all be very delighted with the selection of Judy Dlamini and the other three founder directors, and I'm sure that the balance of the board will ensure independence and diversity. The second fundamental requirement for a fund of this nature is accountability. The board is subject to the strict duties in the Companies Act, and it's one of the big issues today in boards and governments is ethical leadership, and that is a fundamental requirement. So that is accountability. The third requirement is transparency, and a fund of this nature has to be transparent. It has to report regularly to its stakeholders, to its donors, to its beneficiaries. This must be done in its website. It must be in regular press briefings. So transparency of the activities of a fund of this nature is fundamental. And the final bed on which funds of this nature are absolutely dependent, over and above independence of board, transparency, accountability, is good governance. And let's look at how that's been incorporated in the founding constitution of the GBVF Fund. Firstly, we have embodied the requirements of Section 94 of the Companies Act requiring an audit committee. This organization is not bound in terms of law to have had an audit committee and complied with the requirements of Section 94 of the Act. This has been done voluntarily and has been incorporated in the MOI. The second is Section 75 of the Companies Act, which is a very strict prescription of, which is a very strict, may I carry on? Which is a very strict requirement of avoiding directors' conflicts of interest. Then there must be appropriate board committees. And there'll be an audit and risk committee, a fundraising, a disbursement. There'll be strong executive financial capacity and internal audit. As has been mentioned by Irene and Judy, there are a panel of good advisors, and then there will be board committees having charters that comply with state-of-art requirements of codes of conduct, King Code and others, and we've also embodied in the codes of conduct of the board charters the anti-harassment, anti-corruption, and all the up to state-of-art requirements of American bodies where they fund. Now, the acid test of this governance will be twofold. And I must say, and forgive my referring to the Solidarity Fund, but good governance there has resulted in not 1 cent being lost to corruption and not 1 cent of donor funds not reaching the beneficiaries. That has to be the target of the board of this fund. Finally, I just want to mention that the fund will be fully tax compliant. We've been in touch with SARS. We will have all the relevant tax exemptions, VAT exemptions, and this will be a model of compliance with tax and all regulations. So, Madam Chair, Board, thank you for the privilege of being involved in this, and I've little doubt that it will be a focal point in the eradication of gender-based violence.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Michael Katz, who is the chairman of ENS Africa. And we do not feel punished at all, Prof. And the reason why we don't feel punished is because oftentimes where we see something happen in secret, there's a lot of doubt in it. But now what you've done is really solidify and put the stamp of approval around the transparency, the accountability, as well as just the ethical policies that will be governing this fund. And that is so imperative, where we know now and we understand that indeed this will not go towards corrupt activities. This will not go towards activities that benefit only a few at the expense of the many, but indeed it will reach the places and the people that it's meant to reach. So it's not punishment. Actually, what it does, it gives us a moment to actually keep you accountable as well, to ensure that the words that you just shared this afternoon are kept to. So thank you so much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to also introduce now from the European Union, who's a representative in South Africa, Ambassador Rina Kyonka. And of course, this solidifies then the importance of not only global partnerships, but to have that diplomatic collaborative effort when it comes to being able to tackle the scourge of GBVF. It is over to you, Ambassador Rina.
President Ramaphosa, Minister Nkwana Mashabane, Minister Zulu, colleagues from the diplomatic community, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to represent the European Union here today, and at the same time proud to speak on behalf of the entire Development Partners Gender Coordination Group, which comprises the member states of the European Union, Canada, Norway, Switzerland, the UK, and USAID. We would like to acknowledge the progress made by the South African government under your leadership, Your Excellency, in particular, the recent adoption of the National Strategic Plan and today's establishment of the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Fund. This in itself demonstrates real commitment and investment towards eliminating gender-based violence in South Africa. As development partners in South Africa, we share your concerns and those expressed by thousands of women on the shockingly high prevalence of domestic and sexual violence, specifically against women, girls, and members of the LGBTIQ+ community. We know that the COVID-19 induced lockdown was accompanied by substantial increases in cases. Sadly, such violence far too often is accompanied by a culture of silence and impunity, and is often socially normalized and even, I fear, legitimized. GBV not only causes immense trauma and suffering, but also costs the South African economy billions of rands each year, and affects the development, livelihoods, and productivity of millions of families around the country. As development partners, we have all committed to the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and its goals, specifically number 5, which calls for the elimination of all forms of violence against all women and girls in public and private spheres. However, not a single country in the world is really on track to achieve gender equality by 2030, let's be honest. In fact, the Sustainable Development Goal number 5 on gender equality is one of the 3 least financed globally. We know that no government can reach the SDGs alone. We need to partner up with the private sector, unlock their innovation, their engagement, and of course, their capital. Allow me to briefly highlight 2 areas which we think are critical for ending GBV. First, civil society organizations, and in particular, women's organizations, are doing essential work in providing psychosocial services to women and children victims of violence, as well as providing advocacy. Their work is critical, and the need to provide financial support toward their activities cannot be overstated. Second, we must address the social norms underpinning gender inequality, and some of the speakers before me have already alluded to this fact. This means working with men and boys to address how they relate to women, children, and gender non-conforming persons at home, in their communities, and in society. Undoing toxic masculinity is a complex endeavor that starts from a young age and ideally involves society as a whole, including religious and traditional leaders, parents, community leaders, employers, and the media. As development partners, we're committed to support programs to end GBV along the priorities of the National Strategic Plan. We call on the private sector working here in South Africa, as well as at home, to do the same. This is a terrific initiative today. It's not a high-risk commitment, but it's an investment in the future of South Africa and in the women and girls of this country. I would like to acknowledge at this point some EU member states, European countries, as well as Canada, which, through their respective chambers of commerce here, have already mobilized a number of foreign companies to join in this effort, demonstrating their commitment to supporting their host country, South Africa, in defeating the scourge of GBV. Your Excellency, GBV is a worldwide problem which requires global cooperation. The members of the Gender Development Partner Group are ready to work with your government at a global level in order to achieve SDG 5 and our joint international human rights commitments. We are hopeful that today's event will ultimately lead to implementing locally responsive interventions that promote gender justice and equality and a society free from violence. We also hope that there will be greater accountability for commitments and resources targeted at tackling GBV and femicide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for those words, Ambassador Rina Kionka there from the European Union representing South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time to have a little bit of fun and enjoy the sweet sounds from the melodic choir that is the Mzansi Youth Choir. Thereafter, we'll be introducing the Honorable Minister of Social Development, Minister Lindiwe Zulu, who will then speak to actually welcoming the President of the Republic of South Africa, who will then give an address. But for now, we get to enjoy the wonderful, soulful sounds coming in from the Mzansi Youth Choir. Do enjoy.
People of the world, come join in as we put our hands together to celebrate the people most important in our lives, our mothers and grandmothers, our superheroes. Oh mama no go betu sikhuluma ngembokodo. In every situation they are strong, so let's celebrate. Oh, let us celebrate. Siyanibonga nina bazali besizwe, siyanibonga nina zingokodo zesizwe, nisikhusele enhlungwini nasikhulisa ngothando. Siyanibonga nina bazali besizwe, sithi halala 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 yo, sithi halala 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 yo. Where would we be without the love of a mother? Nowhere. We'd be nowhere. Who would we be without her care? No one. We'd be no one. Our mothers and grandmothers are superheroes. Oh mama no go betu sikhuluma ngembokodo. In every situation they are strong, so let's celebrate. Oh, let us celebrate. people of the world, come join in as we put our hands together. Celebrate the people most important in our lives, our mothers and grandmothers, our superheroes. Oh mama no go betu sikuluma gembo gojo. In every situation they are strong. So let's celebrate, let us celebrate. Siyanibonga nina bazali besizwe. Siyanibonga nina zimbogo dozesizwe. Nisikhusela enhlungwini, nasikhulisa ngothando. Siyanibonga nina bazali besizwe. Sithi halala, halala, halala yo. Sithi halala, halala, halala yo. Where would we be without the life of a mother? Nowhere. Would it be nowhere? Who would we be without her care? No one. Would it be no one? Our mothers and grandmothers are superheroes. Oh mama no go betu sikuluma ngembo godo.
Program Director, thank you very much, Ms. Faith Mangope and Ms. Lynette Nduli. President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. Mr. President, with Program Director, the one we have today, clearly the future is in good hands. Minister in the Presidency responsible for women, youth, persons with disability, my sister and comrade Maite Nkwane Mashabane. Minister Kumbuzo Mtsaveni, the Minister in the Presidency, a good afternoon to you also, my sister. Deputy Ministers who are present here today. UN Resident Coordinator, Dr. Nados Bekele Thomas, my sister, thank you for always being there in partnership with us. The Ambassador, EU Ambassador, Ambassador Kyonga, good to see you and thank you very much for always supporting us. Members of the Diplomatic Corps who are attending today, representatives of civil society and development agencies, but most of all and most importantly, the people who are here today to pledge and support the government of the Republic of South Africa in a very important event that we have here today. Thank you, Director of Ceremony, for the kind introduction. It is my singular honor and privilege to introduce His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. No one among us will easily forget the most historic moment in South African pictures when President Nelson Mandela finally walked out of Victor Verster's prison hand in hand with Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela with his right hand in the air. And in that unforgettable historic moment, the young Cyril Ramaphosa, with his unmistakable Afro hairdo, can be seen alongside President Mandela. And a year later, when the ANC held its first national elective conference and after unbanning of liberation movements, the very same Cyril Ramaphosa was elected as Secretary General. He became part of the leadership corps that emerged from the conference with a mandate to negotiate a new constitution with the then National Party, which led to the process known as CODESA 1 and 2, the Convention for a Democratic South Africa. He rose to his prominence for his role as head of the ANC delegation that negotiated apartheid with the government in November 1991. And after the first democratic elections in 1994, Cyril Ramaphosa became a member of parliament and was later elected chairperson of the Constitutional Assembly, where he worked tirelessly and built a partnership with the National Party counterpart, Rolf Meyer. The two of them worked together as midwives to the birth of a world-renowned constitution, a history we must never forget. This is the captain who continues to steer the South African ship in the midst of very tumultuous storm. Would like to commend you, Mr. President, for your bold leadership of this nation in the battlefield against the global COVID-19 pandemic. We commend you, and not only for marshalling the full power of our government, but also for leading the continent's response to the pandemic and ensuring collaboration in this important battle. Thanks to you, your leadership, Mr. President, the continent will now have access to life-saving vaccines through the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team and the UN COVAX facility. We also would want to thank you, Mr. President, for ensuring that the important issue we are talking about and dealing about here today, the silent pandemic of gender-based violence and femicide, is addressed at the highest level of your administration. During his inauguration, President Cyril Ramaphosa outlined his roadmap on tackling the shadow pandemic of gender violence and femicide in South Africa. To use the president's own words, and I quote, "Violent crime is a societal problem that requires society-wide response." Since he took over the president, he convened the first National Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Summit and announced the 5-point plan, emergency plan, which culminated into the National Strategic Plan, which is the subject of our gathering today. The plan calls for a whole of government and society approach to confront this challenge head-on. We are making progress in many ways, big and small, in expanding services where there was none before, in building shelters, empowering survivors to build their lives. But there's still more to be done. The reason we are here today is because we have the unfinished business of ensuring that women and girls of our country are feel safe. Our most urgent task is to ensure the speedy implementation of key pillars of the NSP, and it is for this reason that we are here being led by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let us express our gratitude for His Excellency the President for having found time to come and be with us today and grace this very important event. This, ladies and gentlemen, is true political leadership. Allow me to call upon the President to the platform, the new way of doing things, the virtual platform. Mr. President, the platform is yours.
Program Director, Ms. Faith Mangope, Ministers, Minister Nkwana Mashabane and Minister Zulu and other ministers who are also part of this very important occasion. United Nations Resident Coordinator Dr. Nados Bekele Thomas, founder of the Whitaker Peace and Development Initiative, Mr. Forrest Whitaker, members of the International Women's Forum of South Africa and the leaders thereof, my sisters, Judy Dlamini and Irene Chandley, representatives of Business Unity South Africa, the Black Business Council and Business for South Africa, our partners from the private sector and the philanthropic community and representatives of civil society, the women of South Africa and the young girls of South Africa, honored guests and fellow South Africans. The launch today of the first phase of the private sector gender-based violence and femicide response fund fulfills a promise we made to the women and the children of our country. It was a promise to work together to end the violence perpetrated by men against women and children in our country. 3 years ago, at the Presidential Summit on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, we started out on the road that has brought us to this point. At the summit, delegates from government, business, labor, civil society, and many civil society organizations, I might add, pledged to work together to address the devastating impact of violence on the lives of millions of South African women and children. Last year, we unveiled the National Strategic Plan, the NSP as we call it, which was developed by a multi-sectoral team from across society. The NSP outlines principally 5 interventions. The first one is to provide support to survivors and their families. Second one is to broaden access to justice. And the third, to drive societal change through awareness raising and prevention campaigns and programs. The next one is to strengthen existing programs that we have to fight gender-based violence and femicide. And lastly, to broaden access to economic opportunities for the women and girls of our country. While the government and its partners have made important progress in starting to implement the National Strategic Plan, we are, however, in a very constrained financial climate. But we've made some progress. We've had to urgently divert national resources to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, and like every other area of work, this has had an impact on our gender-based violence and femicide programs. Nonetheless, we continue to prioritize the empowerment of women in all our programs. We have allocated nearly 21 billion rand over the 3 years of the medium-term expenditure framework to support all the pillars of the National Strategic Plan. I've also received a report detailing the expenditure associated with GBV-related programs in every government department. These include prevention programs, measures to address GBV in higher learning institutions, the inclusion of women in science and technology, support services where we want to include women, access to housing and shelter for survivors, economic empowerment of women, and strengthening the criminal justice system. Government departments will be held accountable for the work they do and for the resources that have been committed. I want to assure you, therefore, that before asking you to commit resources today at this fundraising event, we as government are committing and have committed our own. Gender-based violence and femicide impacts us all and requires collective action. Gender-based violence has social, psychological, financial, health, as well as educational and indeed political and security effects, just to name a few. Its effects are insidious, they are extreme, and it also have effects that are intergenerational and long-lasting, not just on the victims and survivors, but also on society. But by far the most significant cost is to our very nationhood. When millions of our citizens have to live in fear from violence and even death simply because they are women or girls, or part of our soul, a part of our soul rather, as a people and as a nation is lost. Gender-based violence and femicide is not what you could call a secondary priority. It is not a woman's issue. Gender-based violence is overwhelmingly and unequivocally a human rights issue. Your presence here today demonstrates your understanding that we all have to become involved to bring an end to gender-based violence. With your financial support, we will be able to step up the national response to gender-based violence by expanding the scope of services at national, provincial, and community levels. We can increase our support to community-based organizations that are doing such valuable work all over the country, in our villages, in our towns, in our cities, and they rely for their work to succeed. They rely on donor funding. The mechanisms of the fund were explained by the speakers who came before me. I want to reiterate that the fund will be managed and administered under the strictest principles of good governance, due diligence, transparency, and accountability. As we launch this fund, I would like to acknowledge and appreciate the contribution of Anglo American of 30 million rand, the contribution from APSA of 20 million rand, and the contribution just announced by the Ford Foundation of 20 million rand. Now, these contributions will make a great difference in the lives of many people. They reflect the true commitment of these valued partners to building a better society. I want to thank the many partners who have come on board to assist us with the establishment of this fund, and in particular, the International Women's Forum of South Africa for driving this process. I also want to thank those companies that have offered their services on a free basis, pro bono, that is, to assist with the financial and audit aspects, as well as legal. We want to acknowledge ENS, Africa, PwC, Deloitte, Alexander Forbes, and APSA for all they have done in this regard. This week, South Africa will hand over the reins of the African Union chairship to the Democratic Republic of Congo. For us, it has been a challenging year in which many of the priorities we set for our term of office have had to take a back seat as we responded to COVID-19. We have nevertheless made progress in a number of areas relating to gender-based violence and the financial inclusion of women. We convened a very successful webinar on the ratification of the International Labour Organization Convention 190 on ending violence and harassment in the workplace. We joined the UN's Generation Equality Forum and participated in advocacy around gender-based violence and women's financial inclusion. We also lobbied for a gender-responsive trade policy thrust to be developed as part of the African Continental Free Trade Area. As a country, South Africa has adopted a policy of 40% preferential public procurement for women-owned enterprises, and we are promoting a minimum target of 30% for the region. The launch of this fund today is testament to the strength and the power of social partnership. It has been a long and challenging road, but we have laid the cornerstone. This is just the beginning, and we are confident that the pledging process that will soon start will continue into this year as more of our partners in the private sector, the international philanthropic movement, will be able to come on board. Since the advent of democracy in South Africa, the business and donor communities have been our dependable developmental partners. I'm keenly aware that you have many competing demands on your money, especially during the pandemic. This is about so much more than philanthropy or corporate social responsibility. It is about making a solid investment in a South Africa that is truly egalitarian, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and prosperous. But it is also about making it very clear that we are here to support the work that needs to be done to ensure that we rid our country of gender-based violence and femicide, and we advance the lives and the interests of the women and girls of our country. I thank you for your presence this afternoon and thank all those who have made this event possible. Let us now focus on the task at hand and work together to realize a society that is free of gender-based violence, of femicide, and of all forms of violence, but a society that is committed to advancing the economic interests of the women of our country. I'd like to thank you, and thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this very important launch of this fund, which I trust and hope will grow by leaps and bounds as many people will see fit to donate money, to make pledges, to support what this country needs to do to show our respect for the women of our country, to show that they have dignity and we will respect them and advance their rights. I thank you.
Thank you very much for those moving words. Authenticity all around. I can safely say that it is the theme. His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa just looking at forging the way ahead when it comes to being able to even have a government looking on and backing up and supporting an initiative such as this, where private sector really raises its hand and says, count me in. I want to be counted when it comes to eradicating the scourge of gender-based violence. We appreciate your words, and I do trust that even the next session, this particular session, will be one that is not only seamless, but just really speaks to the heart of the matter, how people, how private sector are able to come to the party and say, you know what? We want to ensure the sustainability of this initiative. And ladies and gentlemen, therefore, it is my absolute honor and privilege to usher you into this next set of the program, and that is the pledging process. This, how it's going to be done, is that we'll be calling out the various private sector partners who will be then telling us about the pledges that they will be making. They also will have about 2 minutes just to give a speech and also just articulate why is it so important for them to contribute to such a worthy cause. Thereafter, we'll then also give you insight into some of those companies who may not necessarily be holding the platform and speaking this afternoon, but have equally pledged a contribution. So we do thank you so much to all the private sector partners that have come on board during this pledging process. In fact, I get so excited about this because it really does mean that corporate and private sector is putting their money where their mouth is. So to kick us off this afternoon with the pledging process, I would like to call upon Nolita Fakudu, who's the Vice Chairman of the Minerals Council, to really speak to the contribution made to the Minerals Council. Nolita, it is over to you.
Thank you, Program Director, Ms. Faith Mangope. His Excellency, President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, Honorable Minister of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Mayor Maite Ngwane Mashabane, Honorable Minister Melindwe Zulu of Social Development, other ministers and deputy ministers here this afternoon, leaders from government, diplomatic corps, business, labor, civil society, and members of the IWFSA, particularly led by Ms. Irene Shanley. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I join you here this afternoon representing the Minerals Council of South Africa as one of its 4 vice presidents. I also have the added privilege of being the chairperson of the Women in Mining Leadership Forum, with all our member companies represented by their CEOs as champions. As the Minerals Council of South Africa, last year we launched in March our Stop Abuse of Women campaign, building on the extensive work already undertaken under the banner of Women in Mining. Every one of our members has committed to putting in place measures to support women in the workplace, to prevent abuse of any form, and to provide the means of support for women to safely escape and report abuse. With our member companies represented by their CEOs as champions, and some of them will talk this afternoon, and also labor unions as partners, we believe that it is our duty to inform, educate, and act not only on incidents within our mines, but also beyond our mine gates, right into our host communities. Men and women are a vital link in the chain to stop abuse. These initiatives signal our strong commitment to consolidating our approach as an industry towards promoting gender equality and diversity. We realized that we had to align our strategies of how we develop, attract, and retain women in mining as a sector. A statement of fact, it is only as recent as in 1997 that women in South Africa were legally allowed to work underground in the mining industry. In recent years, various companies have had their own initiatives on gender diversity and inclusion. Much is being done in this regard. However, we also know that we still have a long way to go to secure and ensure complete safety from abuse and harassment of women and men in this sector. So, Mr. President, the National Strategic Plan with its pillars has been a welcome framework for us all to use as we continue to respond to the scourge of gender-based violence in the workplace. We as the mining sector are fully supportive of the setting up of the GBVF Response Fund, as it will complement what many of our member companies are already doing. Furthermore, we will continue to encourage our members during the year to step up, as they have done in the past, to find ways to contribute to this worthy undertaking. We thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership and commit ourselves to work even harder with our stakeholders in labor and in the community to ensure that we fight this second pandemic successfully as partners. Our rallying cry as CEOs should be "not under my watch." We thank you very much and pledge our commitment from the Minerals Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Ms. Nolita Fakude. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on, there are those companies who did put their pledges forward, however, will not be joining us just to really share some sentiments. We do want to acknowledge them and take this moment and this opportunity to thank them. Thank you so much for contributing to this initiative. Without your investment, without your contribution, we wouldn't see this day realized. I'm going to read out a few of the names of such companies that have decided to raise their hands, come to the party and say, count me in when it comes to fighting the scourge against GBVF. We're going to thank BAT that has contributed 1 million rand. Thank you so much for that. We would like to thank Sasol for contributing 1 million rand. Thank you so much, Sasol. Aspen, we thank you for your contribution of 500,000 rand. Sanlam, thank you for your contribution of 500,000 rand. Now, every time I read out these figures, I don't know about you, Irene, but I get so excited because that means that certainly the work is being done, and we'll continue sharing with you just around some of those amounts that have been contributed throughout the course of the afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to call upon Ms. Natasha Viljoen, who's the CEO of Anglo American Platinum, just to speak towards her contribution. Natasha, it's over to you.
Good afternoon, and all protocols observed, and thank you for extending this invitation to us for this important engagement. All of us in this room and on this call are alive to the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa and its particular impact on our society. We acknowledge and support the purpose of this gathering, to come together as South Africans against gender-based violence and to demonstrate our support of the National Strategic Plan. I'm here today as a representative of Anglo American Group, as the CEO of Anglo American Platinum, to pledge a financial contribution on behalf of the group of 30 million rand and our unequivocal commitment to working with everyone here to implement the National Strategic Plan. But funding is only an enabler, and without leadership, collaboration, action and courage, it's mere tokenism. Mining hasn't always had a positive track record when it comes to firstly including women and secondly protecting their rights. We still have a lot of work to do. However, it's important to acknowledge that many improvements have been made in recent years. In 2019, the Anglo American leadership team in South Africa, men and women alike, took a pledge at the launch of our Living with Dignity program, which is a wide-ranging program that aims to confront gender-based violence in our host communities and within our operations across the country. The pledge taken by our executives speaks to the very core of who we are and what we stand for, that everyone who works for us will be respected and valued for who they are, that our mines, our processing facilities, our offices are places of safety and dignity. It also goes to the crux of our purpose, which is to reimagine mining to improve people's lives. Our pledge further involves centering safety in our homes, schools, and communities where Anglo-American operates. For us, there's no separation between what happens in the office and what happens at home. As social creatures, we have all the responsibility that all of the spaces we occupy are safe for all. Through our new domestic violence policy, we are offering a comprehensive support package to our employees and their family members who experience violence in their homes and are in the process of building this into formal processes to ensure its sustainability. We have made significant progress to establish a centralized independent office responsible for managing cases of gender-based violence and sexual harassment within the workplace. Through our We Care program throughout this COVID period and before, we continue to offer support to shelters in and around our mining communities, with the hope that they can be a safe haven for those who need it most. This is just the beginning of our journey, and we are not expecting that there won't be any challenges along the way. The ending of the scourge of GBV starts with us, implicating ourselves in the problem and working towards finding a solution. Let's all do our part to create the world that our children deserve. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution there from the CEO of Anglo-American Platinum, Ms. Natasha Viljoen, representing Anglo-American, and for that contribution of 30 million rand, much appreciated. We're going to move on now to Daniel Manele, who's the Chief Executive Officer of ABSA Group, to speak about the contribution coming in from ABSA Group. It's over to you, Daniel.
Good afternoon to all of you, all protocols observed. The high levels of gender-based violence and femicide require all sectors of our society to come together and to do all that we can to create an environment in which all women and collaborative national effort involving government, the private sector, civil society and other stakeholders. Today, we are honored to pledge the following: a cash donation of 10 million rand, project management skills and capacity for the establishment of the fund to ensure that it can be operational as soon as possible, designing and setting up a website and basic marketing activities with the last two pledges I've just mentioned involving the secondment of 4 staff members on a full-time basis to the fund for a period of 3 months as part of a much larger team working on this initiative at ABSA. We will also be developing a donations and disbursement process in conjunction with Alexander Forbes as the administrator. And lastly, we will provide pro bono banking services for the fund for a period of 12 months. Gender-based violence does not only hurt its direct victims, but society as a whole. At ABSA, we recognize that as a large organization that touches lives of people from all walks of life, we have a responsibility to play a shaping role in our society. We also understand that this is not just a law enforcement problem, but a problem for all society that demands everyone to respond meaningfully and consistently in order for women and girls to be safe at all times. We're particularly keen that the funds that we're making available contribute to changing social norms and behaviors, as well as broadening access to justice for victims and survivors. Thank you very much, Program Director. We are proud to be associated with this initiative.
And thank you very much for your significant contribution, Mr. Manele. It certainly goes noticed. Next up, we'd like to call on Dr. Anna Mokgokong, who is the founder of CIH Holdings. Doc, it's up to you. It's over to you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Your Excellency, Mr. President, honored guests. As the chairperson of Community Investment Holdings and its associated companies and friends of the organization and associates, it gives me such pleasure to be participating in this forum today. as I've been in business almost 40 years, and during this period have formed strong business relationships locally, in the corporate world, as well as internationally. I have a formidable network of credible women, as well as noteworthy gentlemen in business in corporate South Africa. You know, we have traveled the journey in our country of observing societal ills in our communities, one of which is a cancer called gender-based violence. And we've been wondering as to how to deal with this as a commune and a community of people in business. And I must say, Mr. President, everybody has responded enthusiastically and positively towards this initiative as it brings us together. And together we can look at solutions of how we can deal and tackle these problems. So it didn't take me much time to actually rally their support because everybody's aware of this and we're wondering what to do. Hence, it gives me great pleasure this afternoon as I speak today that I have commitments and pledges of approximately 15 million, and I'm confident that this number will grow and increase as a number of the companies are busy processing this request. As you know, in today's world, corporate South Africa has to be very, very careful on issues of compliance and governance processes. So some of them are going through this, and I expect this list to grow. So the 15 million comprises of the following companies: Balele Coal, Afrocentric Group, Siriti, MTech, Edison Power Group, Bidvest. Now I must pause at this because this is the story of my day. Bidvest, from Mpumi Madisa, who is the CEO of Bidvest. And by the way, last year, she was the first female